COVID-19?
COVID-19.
I blow the wind of God.
The wind of God.
On you.
On you.
You're a wizard, Kenny, and a really shite one at that. Now, before I get truly started, I'm going to start with an apology and a disclaimer. I will be using terms like sorcery, magic, and possibly witchcraft in this video, and I do not mean to insult any actual practitioners that may watch this. That being said, if you are of the Pentecostal or evangelical persuasion, that's a completely different kettle of fish entirely, seeing as how this is meant to at least get you thinking in a rather rough and satirical way. So, without further ado, we are going to talk about Pentecostal sorcery.
You are destroyed forever?
Why do I use the term sorcery? Even though technically, in D&D terms at least, they, people who try to, channel the power of an otherworldly being, it'd probably be more akin to warlocks, perhaps clerics, if we're being generous. Though, I mean, they do worship a lich. Once again, we're talking strictly in D&D terms. To kind of start this off with a little bit of a, funny joke. But why do I use the term? So, what is Christian or Pentecostal sorcery? I'm more specifically talking about the Pentecostal version because I grew up in that background, and while the Catholic Church has their own set of rituals and, has their own set of, quote unquote occult practices, magical practices, it seems to me to be more heavily ritualized. That being said, I haven't really looked into Catholic practices, Catholic magical practices, but I'd be happy to converse with someone who has, particularly perhaps from a Catholic background. But, so, because evangelicals and, particularly, Pentecostals, those that believe in extra natural forces, supernatural forces, and angels and demons, because they seek to, control these forces to wreak or to, make material changes in the world.
I execute judgment on you, Satan, you destroyer, you killer, you get out, we break your power, you get off.
I.e., naming a disease or ailment as a demon and then exorcising it to heal it, or naming the power of their god to rebuke a hurricane. I think it was Hurricane Harvey that had the group of evangelicals in Florida lining up on the beaches to rebuke the hurricane and make it turn away from making landfall in Florida. I could be wrong on that. I'll do I'll do a search, put a link in the description below, because I do remember seeing a news article on that. Or in these, in the cases that are being, sprinkled throughout this video, where we have, Kenneth Copeland in particular, trying to exercise the disease that shall not be named for monetization reasons, or rather reach reasons. The disease that I shall not name because I want this video to actually be seen. And, trying to exorcise it from America, because...
In the name of Jesus.
Oh, thank you, Jesus.
Standing in the office of the prophet of God, I execute judgment on you, COVID-19.
Oh, Ramash.
So, what makes the building blocks of Christian, or of, Pentecostal magic? And why do I specify that it is sorcery rather than, say, witchcraft or wizardry or thaumaturgy or what have you? Well, once again, it's more of a channeling, a channeling practice, as opposed to something ritualized. And yes, there are, physical props involved in certain practices. Basis of Pentecostal magic practices are, you have, the foundation is acts of faith, denial, exercising the supposed authority granted to you by your patron, and using that authority to channel the power of an entity that's, that's part of but separate from the patron. Once again, we're talking about tri-omni, Yahweh, Jesus, Holy Spirit being.
You come down from your place of authority, destroyer. You come.
So it's very much an exercise of faith and authority to, to channel this, the power of this Holy Spirit. So why? So how is, how's this done? Aside from, the clips that we've seen, you declare the authority given to you, usually naming, the spirit that you're, it's usually some kind of, channeling exorcism. You name the spirit of whatever you're trying to, exercise or rebuke or control.
You will destroy through COVID-19. No more!
No more.
And, you declare your authority over it as, by invoking your patron and declaring that your patron had given you that authority to enforce your will on this being, on this, supposed spirit. And, and you command it to usually leave, or, or you invoke the, the blood sacrifice that, Jesus had made, as a, as a sort of sympathetic blood magic. You don't actually shed your own blood, but you do invoke that and say, by that, we are protected by that. So you're either invoking authority granted by the patron, or you're calling up the memory of a previous sacrifice in an act of sympathetic magic, while trying to, channel the, this other portion of the so-called triumphant God. I haven't, honestly, the only two parts of the, the Trinity, invoked in Christian magical practices are, Jesus, either through invoking the sacrifice, or invoking the authority given, and then the Holy Spirit as acting as sort of a cosmic battery. Yahweh, or God the Father, doesn't really necessarily play any part in such acts.
And the United States of America is healed and well again, saith the mighty
Hallelujah.
Spirit
Glory.
of peace, who is also the Prince of War.
So we move from acts, from invoking authority to denial, where the practitioner denies that any such entity that they are revoking or invoking has any control over them.
Dark fire will not avail you!
Or, whoever they're casting the spell on. Usually it's, invoked as some sort of a protective charm. And also, you're through this act, you are denying the very fundamental basis of what we know of reality by, insisting these acts of, magic can actually, do anything. That by, that through invocations and, supposed channelings, and with, using such props as olive oil or some other oil, to put it on the forehead of the person being, charmed, or, the person who is having the spell or exorcism, what have you, put on them, is effective or whatever. And another thing is, like, it's like, when two or more are gathered, there I am also. So it's why you'll see usually groups of, church elders, or, groups of practitioners incanting over a single person to have them, freed of whatever ailment or evil spirit that seems to be troubling them. But not so, you deny the hold that this supposed spirit has over it, but there is a lot of self-denial. Like, for instance, fasting is a common practice to, to ritualistically purify the person, through an ordeal, so that they can, show their faith.
Because I fasted January, the 1st of January to the 26th of January. I did not eat. I fasted I came to America, and then I felt now I can eat again. But then in February, March, I felt God say you had to fast and seek me more. So in April, I fasted 40 days.
Demonstrations of faith are, once again, it comes back to using their belief to try and work, to try and overrule the laws of nature as we know them. And, the most extreme such demonstrations of faith is, the infamous snake handling. Now, the church I grew up in taught that was that was going too far, and it was a pagan practice, as in a not Christian practice.
Of dying, and I feel like I'm dying,
and of course, an ordeal of self-denial like fasting seems to be a particular favorite of the would-be sorcerer Tormund Sundergard. And of course, by requiring the would-be beneficiary of the magic to show faith, it, of course, leads to the rejection of evidence-based treatment. Like, for instance, when a diabetic who went to one of Tormund's, get-togethers in Phoenix to, get healed, didn't take their insulin and went into a diabetic coma. Now, and this leads into the harm that these, practices can cause, where you're having people reject medical knowledge, reject, how we know things work, and claim that they're protected by some divine force, by, these wards that are cast by channeling, the supposed cosmic battery. And, that's why, some of the more evangelical, or, it's why you've got people still, ignoring the stay-at-home orders to try or flat out violating, flaunting the, stay-at-home practices to try, because, they believe, because otherwise it won't work. If you don't believe it'll work, then it won't work. Because you've got to have faith. If you have the faith of a mustard, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. God has given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions and to overcome all the powers of the enemy. And who is this enemy? It is an amorphous, spiritual force.
Demonic attacks start to manifest in my body, and I couldn't breathe. And
Judgment on you, Satan! You destroyer! You killer! You get out! You break your power! You get off!
That is, said that of course is said to, rule over the world. Which is why, unless Christians aren't, unless you're being persecuted, you aren't Christianing right, really. But that, that kind of covers what I roughly had in mind talking about the practices of Christian magic, at least in the evangelical sects. And of course, I am being flippant when I'm calling it, sorcery and magic, but that's what it is. It is a magical practice. And I'm specifically using sorcery, once again, because it isn't as ritualized as other practices. And from what I know, it's one of the least used, terms of, of people who say they practice such practices. And I have no problem with that as long as you don't deny science. As long as you don't deny what works. What we have evidence for. That's, you do you. But, and I know this will piss this will piss fundamental evangelical and Pentecostals off, because because their book says, magic and sorcery is a no-no. Even though on one hand, you have, you shall not practice divination, while on the other hand, here's a divination ritual that also causes abortions. But that's besides the point. What is the point is, feel free to like, comment, share, subscribe, comment if you have any points about this, if you think I've missed anything, or if you want to fill in any or debate anything in the comments below. Be happy to look at them and respond. And remember, indoctrination is a hell of a drug. I caught a black magic woman. I caught a black magic woman. I caught a black magic woman. She got me so blind I can't see. That she's a black magic woman and she's trying to get the devil out of me.